The entitled neighbor tore down my fence. He thought his political connections made him untouchable. He discovered I owned the land beneath his house. Act 1. The Boundary Intrusion. For nearly 3 decades, my family lived in a modest, beautiful suburban property on the northern edge of the valley. It was a peaceful, heavily wooded piece of land that my grandfather had purchased back when the entire district was nothing but dirt roads and open fields. I inherited the property, along with the old craftsman home, 3 years ago. I spent thousands of dollars restoring the gardens, maintaining the century-old oak trees, and erecting a clean, professional boundary fence along the eastern perimeter to keep the space secure for my family. It was my sanctuary, a quiet refuge from the chaotic rhythm of my professional life as a structural land surveyor and legal cartographer. Then, the empty lot next to us was sold to a man named Harrison Sterling. Sterling was a high-ranking, insufferably arrogant city official with deep political connections in the municipal zoning board. He was the type of man who wore his wealth like armor, driving an oversized luxury SUV and speaking to working-class people with a tone of rehearsed condescension. Within 2 months of buying the lot, he cleared every single tree on his property and constructed a monstrous 3-story modern mansion that towered over our historic gardens like a concrete fortress. But the size of his house wasn't enough to satisfy his ego. Sterling wanted an expansive, wrap-around concrete patio and an underground pool pavilion, and his architectural drafts had a major problem. He lacked the necessary clearance along the side yard to meet the luxury specifications. Instead of adjusting his blueprints, Sterling decided to simply appropriate my land. I was away on a 4-day professional surveying assignment in another state when I received a frantic phone call from my wife. She was trembling with anger and anxiety. "You need to come home right now," she whispered, over the heavy, rhythmic thud of mechanical tools echoing in the background. Sterling hired a commercial demolition crew. They just ripped down our entire wooden boundary fence with chainsaws and a small excavator. They're digging up our flower beds right now. I caught the very next flight back. When I arrived at my property, the destruction was staggering. My professional fence was reduced to a pile of splintered kindling stacked at the edge of the road. Sterling's construction crew had cleared a path 2 meters deep into my yard, destroying 3 generations of mature landscaping. They were already pouring a heavy gravel foundation and setting up wooden concrete forms for a massive, permanent stone pavilion. Sterling himself was standing on his lawn, clipboard in hand, directing the workers as if he owned the entire block. I walked directly up to him, my blood boiling, but maintaining the cold, mechanical control that my profession required. "Sterling, what the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded, pointing at the excavator. "You just destroyed my fence and crossed a legally established property boundary. Order your men to stop immediately." Sterling slowly turned around, adjusted his designer sunglasses, and looked at me with a smirk that dripped with pure structural contempt. "Let's be adult about this," he said, tapping his clipboard against his thigh. "Your old fence was an eyesore, and according to my personal measurements, it was encroaching on my lot anyway. I'm doing you a favor by upgrading the neighborhood. The new pavilion is going exactly where it's marked. If you have an issue, feel free to file a complaint with the municipal zoning office. I happen to chair the regulatory committee there, so I'm sure they'll process your paperwork with the utmost care." He laughed, turned his back on me, and walked away. He was entirely convinced that his public title and administrative connections made him a king within this county. ACT 2, the Deep Dive Archive. I did not call the police that afternoon, and I did not engage in a screaming match. To engage with a corrupt bureaucrat on an emotional level is a complete waste of energy. Instead, I retreated into my home office, locked the door, and went to work. As a professional land surveyor and legal cartographer, my entire career was built around the extraction of absolute geographical truth from historical archives. Sterling believed the local zoning maps were the final, ultimate authority on land distribution. Maps that he and his political allies had spent years manipulating to benefit their private real estate portfolios. But the municipal zoning database is merely a secondary system. The true, absolute legal foundation of all land ownership in our state rests within the Master County Registry archives. Heavy, leather-bound original deeds, and sovereign land grants dating back to the late 19th century. I logged into the deep-tier state geological repository, bypassing the superficial city interfaces, and pulled the complete historical transaction log for both of our parcels, tracing them back to 1894. As I analyzed the coordinate strings, vector coordinates, and original high-precision benchmark points, I discovered a historical anomaly that made my heart stop. In 1912, the entire valley had undergone a massive, mandatory railway expansion project. To secure the right-of-way, the original developer of the land had signed a complex, permanent, multi-parcel easement and reciprocal land swap with the County Rail Authority. When the railway line was pulled back 30 years later, the land beneath what was now Sterling's entire eastern lot didn't revert to public domain or standard commercial zoning. According to the original sovereign deed restrictions, the absolute title of that specific subparcel, comprising exactly 45% of Sterling's current yard and the entire footprint of his newly poured house foundation, was legally deeded to my grandfather's estate as part of an ancient compensation package for land severance. The city zoning board had committed a catastrophic clerical error during the suburban development boom of the 1980s. They had drawn a standard commercial grid over the area, entirely blind to the active, unexpelled historical title resting in the Master County Registry. Sterling's expensive modern mansion wasn't just encroaching on my yard. Nearly half of his entire residential structure was built directly on land that legally belonged to me. The very ground beneath his luxury kitchen and master suite was my property. To ensure my data was entirely bulletproof, I contacted two of the most respected, independent licensed surveyors in the state, colleagues who owed nothing to the local municipal board. I paid them out of pocket to conduct an emergency, high-precision, GPS boundary audit. They spent 5 hours on the property, using state-of-the-art satellite telemetry to mark the exact legal boundaries. When they finished, their data perfectly mirrored my two historical findings. They hammered heavy, bright pink steel survey stakes directly through Sterling's newly poured concrete walkway, indicating the true, unyielding boundary line. Act 3. The trap is sprung. The next morning, Harrison Sterling stepped onto his front porch and saw the bright pink steel stakes driven straight through his expensive concrete. He went completely ballistic. Within 10 minutes, he was pounding violently on my front door. I opened it calmly, holding a hot cup of coffee. Sterling's face was bright purple, his neck veins bulging with uncontainable rage. "Are you out of your mind?" he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the stakes. "You vandalized my property. I will have a city crew down here by noon to rip those stakes out and fine you into bankruptcy. You don't know who you're messing with." I took a slow sip of my coffee, looked him dead in the eye, and handed him a heavy manila envelope. "I suggest you read the contents of that file before you call your friends at the city office," I said, my voice deadpan and steady. "Inside, you'll find the certified historical deeds from the Master County Registry, the original 1912 sovereign land grants, and a certified satellite survey completed yesterday by the state licensing board. Sterling, you didn't just build your pavilion on my land. Your kitchen, your garage, and half of your master bedroom are currently sitting on property that I own. You are trespassing on a massive structural scale." Sterling snatched the envelope, letting out a sharp, scoffing laugh. "This is absolute garbage. A fake map won't save you. My uncle is the district director of the planning commission. This house is fully permitted." He tore the envelope open, his eyes scanning the original land grant documents and the official state surveyor stamps. As he read down the line of historical title successions, his laughter suddenly vanished. The color drained from his face with terrifying speed, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. He stared at the satellite layout, which clearly showed his multi-million-dollar house sliced completely in half by a thick, red line of absolute ownership. This has to be a clerical mistake," he stammered, his arrogant posture completely deflating, his voice dropping an octave into a nervous, high-pitched squeak. "The city approved the permits. We can work this out. I can offer you a fair price for the easement portion." "There is no negotiation, Sterling," I said, leaning against the door frame. You explicitly told me 48 hours ago that if I had an issue, I should follow the regulatory process. Well, I followed it. I've already filed a formal quiet title action and a permanent structural injunction with the state superior court. My lawyers are executing the filings as we speak. See you in court, neighbor. Neighbor. I closed the door firmly, leaving him standing on my porch in absolute, paralyzed silence. ACT 4. The structural demolition. The legal battle didn't take years. It was a total high-velocity slaughter because the evidence was drawn directly from the unassailable Master County Registry. The city zoning board had zero legal standing to protect their corrupt permits. The state superior court judge, a no-nonsense jurist who despised municipal corruption, looked at the telemetry maps and the original 1912 titles for less than 20 minutes during the preliminary hearing. Sterling's high-priced defense lawyers tried to argue for a forced land sale or an equitable easement, but my attorney, an absolute shark named Raymond Vance, shut them down instantly. 3. Your Honor, Raymond Vance argued, stepping up to the bench. The defendant did not commit an innocent mistake. He willfully and maliciously destroyed my client's boundary fence with commercial machinery after being explicitly warned. He attempted to use his political office to intimidate a private citizen. He does not deserve equitable relief. He deserves the full, unyielding weight of property law. The judge agreed completely. The court issued an absolute, permanent injunction. Harrison Sterling was ordered to completely remove every single structural element encroaching on my property within 45 days at his own personal expense. This didn't just mean clearing the stone pavilion. It meant he was legally required to demolish nearly half of his actual residential mansion, slicing through the concrete foundation, tearing down the eastern walls, and removing the entire structural support grid of his house to vacate my land. The scene that unfolded 3 weeks later was pure, unadulterated poetic justice. I sat on my front porch, drinking an iced tea, while a massive, professional structural demolition crew hired by Sterling's insurance company arrived on the block. Because his insurance policy explicitly excluded coverage for building on land not owned by the policyholder due to criminal negligence, Sterling had to pay for the entire demolition and structural stabilization out of his own pocket. The sound of heavy jackhammers, concrete saws, and industrial excavators filled the neighborhood for 2 straight weeks. I watched as commercial workers literally sawed Sterling's luxury mansion in half, exposing his high-end kitchen cabinets and designer furniture to the open air like a broken dollhouse. The stone pavilion was completely jackhammered into dust, and the soil was entirely replaced. Sterling stood by his SUV every single day, watching his multi-million-dollar investment turn into a fractured, unsellable concrete ruin. He looked aged, broken, and completely ruined. Act 5, Total Restitution. The structural demolition was only the first phase of his total financial liquidation. Following the successful property reclamation, Raymond Vance launched a massive civil lawsuit against Sterling for malicious destruction of property, intentional trespass, and emotional distress. With the state court's ruling already set in stone, Sterling's legal team knew they had no defense. To avoid a public trial that would completely destroy what remained of his political career, Sterling signed a massive, comprehensive settlement agreement. He was forced to pay me exactly $340,000 in cash restitution, a sum that fully covered the construction of a magnificent, custom stone boundary wall along my true perimeter, a complete professional overhaul of my destroyed gardens by the best landscapers in the state, and a substantial financial cushion that allowed me to invest heavily into my private surveying firm. The final blow came from the state regulatory authorities. The exposure of the historical title error triggered a massive, sweeping investigation into the local municipal zoning board by the State Corruption Task Force. They uncovered a multi-year web of fraudulent permits and illegal land allocations orchestrated by Sterling and his inner circle. Within 3 months, Sterling was stripped of his public title, fired from the committee in absolute disgrace, and formally indicted on multiple felony charges of official misconduct and corporate fraud. Today, the eastern side of my yard is bordered by a stunning 2-meter-high privacy wall built from premium natural stone. My gardens have completely regrown, more beautiful and vibrant than they ever were before. Next door, what remains of Sterling's mansion sits as a bizarre, abandoned, half-demolished concrete shell, a permanent, public monument to the dangers of unbridled corporate arrogance. Harrison Sterling believed that his expensive suits, his political connections, and his administrative authority gave him the right to tear down my fence and claim my heritage. He thought he could bully an ordinary engineer with bureaucratic threats, but he forgot that titles and permits are nothing but ink on paper. And in the end, the unyielding truth of the earth always wins. The land belongs to those who hold the foundation, and that is how you make an arrogant neighbor pay for every single inch. What do you think? Did he get what he deserved? Let me know in the comments. If you loved this absolute masterpiece of a revenge story, smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next video. Thanks for watching, and see ya.